Thank you, Inakshi, for such a warm introduction, and to your team for organizing such a wonderful companion event to this exhibition. Thank you all for being here, and my personal thanks to the Dahanukar family for welcoming us into Prafulla's life and work. And I'm just so thrilled to be having this talk amidst her work and to share more of her journey with all of you. To begin, I wanted to ask Gopika if you could just tell us a little bit about your mom and the artist at once, and just the spirit of her work and how you recall her as an artist.
Thank you, Beth. Am I audible? Well, I feel it's really difficult to define Ma, because she was just like her paintings. She was one that was, she was a persona who was larger than life. I didn't see her as, I saw her as a mom, of course, but I also saw her as someone who was this vast human being, this person who was really holding space for so many more than just Gauri and me. And this really came through her spirit and the way she kind of was, her beingness in the world and how she was as a human being. I can also say something about her coming to her studio or entering her space. So when she painted in her studio, had a certain atmosphere that was very interesting. It was always filled with a raga, perhaps. So you'll kind of walk into her studio and she would be really intimate in that moment. And you would hear her sing, you know, like a todi. So you'd see her doing that with the rollers, and it would feel like, oh, I'm witnessing this, but I don't want to sort of, you know, I don't want to. It was like her space. She really had this intimacy with the moment, with the colors, with the notes, and everything was like, it's almost like she was not only reaching in, but she was being reached by, and that's what she was looking for, I think, in that moment. And her engagement with the color was not, I mean, something of her spirit showed that she was not just engaged with the blue, for example, but really the blueness of the blue. She was in touch with that. And so you could see that her spirit was really about her painter. The painter in her was more than just a painter. She was really embodying what was in the moment, what was, you know, being informed by the notes and the colors. And sometimes she was in total silence. But I know that we would not dare go near her when she was in that space. She was like really engaged with it. And it was beautiful to witness. We would probably be drawing on the floor or something like that. So yeah, that's Mum and Ma. We called her Ma.
And you've also talked a little bit about her performativity. And just, you know, her car and her jewelry.
I did. And oh my God, yeah, she was very bold. She had this red Fiat with a black infinity arrow going across. I think some of the people here might remember it. I mean, as kids, we were, you know, everybody knew when she went across Marine Drive, they're like, oh, there's Prafulla going, and they would like wave out to us in the car as she was driving the car. And yeah, she was driving the car and all over the city, she was everywhere. She was here, she was supporting artists all the time. There were people at our home. I used to go down before school, someone's come with a ballpoint sketch, and she would just like very honestly say what she had to say. Because she was not someone who, she really intended for that artist to develop the talent. It was not because, you know, she just wanted to say something nice to the artist, but she would say, no, work on that hand looks a little off, do it like for a few more days and come back with the, you know, and I'll tell you more. So she had this wonderful, like very, you know, take people in there, feel like they're really her own, you know, like her own children were coming to see her. It felt like that. And yeah, I think that's what really touches me about Ma, and that's how I reflect on it. I reflect on her now, and I feel like, wow, she really had that capacity in her work and in her expression to really have that intentionality of like wanting to transcend form, to really land into form fully. There was that sense, you know, that there was just something very beautiful to witness. And I think we grew in this amazing atmosphere of not just visual art, but we've both been, I mean, I think all of us, even the other cousins who are also like kind of, you know, always we grew up with this notion that everybody was equal, and so all of us were exposed. We were always with her. I mean, I've come to Jahangir a million times for visual art exhibitions, but not just that, musical concerts. She exposed us. There was music in the house. There were people singing. There was theater. We were all the time. I mean, all my cousins have definitely at one point gone with mom to some of these. You know, she was just soaking us in the arts, and we grew up in a very creative environment. That's for sure.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction to your mom's spirit. And you know, I'm really struck by the way that you talk about her intensity and performativity and generosity in equal parts, and it gives you this sense of somebody who was, I mean, truly an artist and larger than life, and that comes across in the work, and also just the bigness of her vision across various pursuits. But I wanted to actually go back to the beginning and ask Savita to talk about Prafulla finishing art school and entering the Bombay art world, and you know, how she you know, should be situated in Bombay's and India's art history, really.
Prafulla went to art school in that first decade after independence, so it was an incredibly optimistic period. It was a period when a lot of women went to art school, and only the best were chosen to do mural art. And Prafulla was very, very lucky to have a professor like Gaitonde, who really, the two of them were on many levels on the same wavelength. So when Prafulla graduated with the gold medal, as Anakshi has already told us, Prafulla was one of the first artists to inhabit a studio. And that in itself was a very, very modern thing to do. Her going to art school also was a very modern thing, because she came from a family of musicians. To stand up for herself and say, no, I want to pursue visual arts rather than music, took a lot of courage, which Prafulla always had, but it also took a lot of courage from her family. And that courage showed when Prafulla applied and received a French scholarship to go to Atelier 17 in Paris. Can you imagine in 1960 to send a young unmarried woman across the waters, the seven seas, as it was always considered in Indian philosophy, to live on her own in Paris, that seminal city of wildness and bohemian life. To allow your unmarried daughter to do that was an incredible leap of faith and courage. And for Prafulla to take on that and to go into an environment that was unknown, and into a medium that she hadn't been exposed to either. She learned printmaking, and as you can see from the prints that have survived her various generosities, that cumulative effect of printmaking, working with line, then with form, then with shade, really allowed her to resolve abstraction in her own mind. So when she came back to India in 1961 and took up a studio at Bhulabai Memorial, she understood what she wanted to do with abstraction, but then she also reached back into her roots. And her abstraction, especially what you see here, is not only a combination of what she saw in Paris with post-war abstraction everywhere, but it is an abstraction that is distilled from Hindu philosophy. It is an abstraction of thought. The fact that her process and her methodology marries both East and West is absolutely to her own credit. Do you want me to say some more about the wonderful Bhulabai Desai years?
Sure.
So Bhulabai Desai Memorial Institute was an amazing place. The first people to take up residence were Uday Shankar with his dance troupe, And then you had Ravi Shankar teaching sitar and his music classes. Prafulla was one of the first artists to take on a studio, which she shared very generously with Hussain and with Gaitonde, who used the studio as if it was theirs, who happily coerced Prafulla to feed them whenever it was necessary. And that really sets the tone for Prafulla. Prafulla was artist, mother figure, friend, colleague, one of us, as all the guys called her. And more than that, she reveled in the theatre company that Vijay Mehta had over there. She worked closely with Bal Chabra in his gallery. She made networks. She made networks coalesce. She brought wealthy collectors into Bhulabai. She made artists have exhibitions. She pushed everyone beyond their own beliefs. And I think that sort of sums up the Prafulla as Ma and Prafulla as artist and woman as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Savita. I think you really encapsulated what these early incredible years were like. And this was a really important moment of experimentation for modern Indian art. And in many ways, telling these stories and the fullness of them, of how Prafulla was friend and mother figure and so generous to artists, including Hussain and Gaitonde, is so important because it helps dispel this idea of a solitary, lone, usually male genius artist. And the sociality of the art world in Bombay was so important at the time. And Prafulla was at the center of it. And so I think, you know, even if these stories in some ways come across as anecdotes to the art, they are very important to understanding how artists' work was developed. I wanted to come back a little bit to this way in which Prafulla developed abstraction and then essentially pulled back from it, which you see in the exhibition. And those of you who are familiar with a conventional history of abstraction, which is usually a Western history, you know, would have heard, you know, either at art school or in European and American and even Asian museums that, you know, abstraction starts with Impressionism and it's a long straight line until you get to, you know, Robert Ryman in the 1970s. In India, this was not the case. Indian artists were aware of abstraction and were able to habilitate aspects of abstraction to serve their own expression. And so that's, to an extent, what Savita is talking about marrying East and West, bringing in their own philosophy and borrowing aspects of form and ideas that were important and valuable to this new developing artistic language. Prafulla was one of several artists who worked in this way. Gaitonde, by contrast, once he found what he called non-objective form, you know, stayed with it for the rest of his career. But, you know, artists like Tayyab Mehta, who are known for their figures, also had a period of being focused on forms like the diagonal in relation to works that, you know, he saw at MoMA on a Rockefeller Fellowship, specifically Barnett Newman's One Mint from 1948, which has a vertical strip. And it's just one example of how artists were in this constant tension between thinking of the figure, thinking of people and the environment around them, and the courage that you had to have to be an artist at all, and going, you know, so far as to paint, you know, pure abstraction. And you see that tension in Prafulla's work throughout her career. Of course, we're in a room here that's filled with her Eternal Space and Mindscape works, which are conventionally abstract. But I do want to, you know, keep an eye on the fact that this is a very different and specific history of India after independence, and it merits being read on its own terms rather than in relation to, you know, another nation or another region. And even with that, to get away from this idea of a canon led by, you know, a single figure inventing something and sticking with it, but rather that there was so much time and room for experimentation, especially in these early days. You'll notice in the figural works in room 1 some of the similarities in Prafulla's works with contemporaries like B. Prabha, where there's a feminine perspective of painting women. And this is also equally important in this moment when we are in a very male-dominated art history, both in India and globally. So there are many ways that her work and her interventions were incredibly significant for India's art history and India's art world, as you've already heard, after independence. We've already talked a little bit about murals, but I wonder if we could actually, if we could talk a little bit more about, you know, how Prafulla came to various materials, Gopika, and, you know, it essentially habilitated some of the beginnings of public art in India.
Okay, I can speak a little bit about that. Well, I think when she was pregnant with me, she was already creating that big mural in Nilamar of, with, you can see a kind of a little part of that, you know, study here in the exhibition. And so I already grew up seeing her with all these ceramic pieces behind our home in the studio, and then working with so many others and so many materials. Of course, it was also something for us to see that big glass mural on Shivsagar estate, and then somebody saying, Ma did that. I'm like, wow, Ma did that, you know, like going across and then getting used to that. Yeah, and for her to go up, we heard recently stories that she went up the scaffolding from I.M. Kadri himself, who I met recently, and he said, she was so bold, we ordered these glass pieces from London just because she had envisioned it that way, and you know, and she was up on the scaffolding with the people who were like putting up those pieces in the 60s, and that's fantastic to think about that image of this woman up with those khaki shorts, you know, on the, and then you see pictures of her laying out the mural, because that's what I.M. Kadri talked about, that she would she was using all the space while they were building the building, this very large space where she would lay out the whole mural, and there she really wore the sari and you know, come all dressed up, working with the artists that were really collaborating with her vision. And then the wooden material, and then the metal work, and she saw scraps of metal. I heard from Manohar Matre, one of her, you know, classmates, recently, that they all found, she saw this scrap metal under Artist Center, and she said, oh my God, we have to do something with this. Let's make a mural from this. And then soon after, she was commissioned to do a mural, and she said, that's the mural I'm going to do with the scrap metal. And she kind of sketched it out and had these collaborators that came in to kind of help her put it together. So it was very interesting to see that she had this, she was really, her materiality and her engagement with the materiality and whatever material she was with, she was really in it. She was in the material. And then she would sort of feel into it to kind of sketch something for, and truly in an abstract way. And when you think about abstraction, I also think about like how, I just remember her doing those sketches sometimes and saying, wow, like how far out is this? You know, like she's going from this to this to this, and mirrors and wooden pieces are coming in, and yeah, she's just, it's such a range of play, like, you know, with material. Very interesting, yeah. I think that was amazing to witness.
Yeah, I think the mural practice and the multidisciplinary aspect of Prafulla's life was one of the great discoveries that we all had together in a sense in this research process. But I wonder if we could talk even more about really the nitty-gritty of what it would have been like for her, one, as a woman, to be commissioned by an architect like I.M. Kadri to work on these public murals for new buildings in South Bombay that, you know, largely converted from family bungalows, but also about the materials, sourcing them, getting familiarity with them. I mean, how did she find scrap metal and just, you know, out of nowhere, or maybe not out of nowhere, be able to envision what this, you know, freestanding installation at Nesco looks like?
Yeah.
So I know those are two questions, but
yes. I think that she just had that capacity to really, you know, bring in, I think she just could envision something. So when I spoke to I.M. Kadri, in fact, he said, she insisted that this is going to be in glass pieces, like this is her sketch and this is what she wants to do. And it took time for these glass pieces to come by ship. They were like shipped from London back here and he laughed about it, but he said, you know, I really trusted her. I trusted her with that. It was a big facade of a building, but somehow we trusted her. And she was, I think there was the capacity that she held was perhaps her, or the capacity to kind of, her confidence that she kind of had in her personality to come, you know, come across as that, this persona who knows what she's doing, you know, like, And someone like I am Kadri to say, yes, of course, you can do that. That is commendable, right? What do you think, Savita Tai?
Absolutely. She used different materials, but she also coerced or bullied manufacturers into making materials for her.
Yeah,
so there's,
you know that story,
yeah. There's a story, an anecdote of a German ceramic tile maker who was somewhere out in Valkeshwar, and Prafulla had been commissioned to make a mural which she thought would look best in ceramic. So she persuaded him to stop his commercial practice, to make specific tiles in specific sizes with a specific glaze that she wanted that would work for her mural. And she was that kind of very persuasive person. And so that's what he did. And then later she found someone in Kurla who also was able to make tiles for her. So you see a lot of her work in murals in ceramic. But what is extraordinary is how she was able to envisage having found materials at a time when people didn't even say the words found material, and put that into a mural, and how forgotten her murals are in the narrative of Indian art history. And I think a lot of what we're doing is recovering all that knowledge so that many more people can avail of that knowledge and go and see the murals, because some of them are still in the public eye.
Yeah.
And for her, having her artwork seen by as many people as possible, that was what she said she was an artist for.
I think it also draws my attention to like this, my awareness to thinking about how she saw beauty in everything, like seeing scrap metal and then envisioning something beautiful from it. So she saw beauty in materials. She saw beauty was part of her life. She wore beautiful saris, aesthetic. She was, everything about, you know, she did ikebana, like, arrangements on our dining table that were absolutely beautiful and abstract, and wow, like how did you do that with those one leaf and that one stick and it was absolutely perfect. And she would say, don't move it, and she would fire us, you know, like, don't this way, that way, and she would compose it, and it was always, you know, absolutely beautiful. And we had that on our dining table every day. I mean, and Gaurita tells me the stories, my sister, she tells me the story of remembering, actually, this, what you're speaking about, which is that, like, a space where tiles and, like endless tiles were being made for mass murals. The one in Nilambar is actually quite a big mural. It's got the sun and the moon that spans, I think, more than 80 feet. So yeah, so she thought really big, you know, like her work was, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were on JJ's campus the other day, and you see all of these figurative busts and figurative half bodies, and it's striking that even in 2024, her work, you know, this public work appears so radical. And, you know, as a curator and art historian, I often notice that a painter's sculptures are very heavily criticized. People think that painters cannot produce sculpture. This is not true. I mean, sometimes it's true, but it's not a rule that one follows. But I'm really struck by her incredible facility across materials and across scales from very early in her career. You see, in this exhibition that many of the works are domestic scale, and this has to do with availability of canvases, studio sizes, very practical concerns. Of course, there's one larger work from 1981 just behind us. But this idea that she could go produce a monumental installation of scrap metal at Nesco very early on, I think is truly astounding. Not to say nothing yet even of the gender bias that she would have faced.
Absolutely, and not just gender bias, but once she was married and considered a woman of privilege, she was almost written out of a lot of things and a lot of commissions because people assumed that she didn't need it. And part of it was facilitated by her because she constantly helped people. She was so collaborative. She wanted to make sure that artists who came in from other parts of Maharashtra and Mumbai, who were less recognized, got their moment in the light. And in doing that, she took the light away from herself. And it's, you know, part of the reason for doing a book is to shine that light back on what she did and what she accomplished, and being a collaborator, making sure that institutions survived, thrived, helped younger artists, was part of what she did and took on as a responsibility, which is something that people of her generation did, and sadly, maybe a younger generation needs to learn from that these institutions need to survive, need artists' help, need dedication, and some amount of selflessness, and a lot of helping of other people, because the art world doesn't survive with everyone's just looking out for their own egos or for commercial purposes. So that's my little bit of soapboxing, and I'll stop.
No, I think it's very important to come back to the way in which Prafulla helping others in a way disadvantaged her own career, whereas at the same time you can see the bigness of her vision in the works themselves, in these monumental works that she's creating, in the fact that she also had simultaneous other pursuits, while also raising a family, while having perfect arrangements on the dinner table every night where there was beauty everywhere. So there were all of these competing and contrasting qualities at the same time, which is also part of what it meant and still means to be a woman artist working today. And so I think we have to give her even more credit for the fact that she worked assiduously throughout her career. We even earlier this week, a very earnest journalist asked the question of how much time Prafulla had for her own work, which when you think about the way that that's framed, there is a sense of, well, she was doing all of these other things, as a woman, as a mother, as somebody leading institutions, as giving her time to others. How much time could she have really had? But she did have so much time for her work and so much time for beauty. And I wonder if you could also, in talking about that, tell us a little bit about her sense of color and just how the way that she noticed things in her environment, that she's essentially always working.
Well, let me bring you to a story. When I was a little child and I went to her and I said, "Ma, can you teach me to draw?" And she said, "Well, first you have to learn to see, then you can learn to draw." I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Go to the garden and bring me 5 different leaves with different shapes." And I said, "Oh, so leaves have..." So that was the first time I actually noticed that leaves have different shapes. And then she said, "Look, all the greens are different. They have to be all different greens, remember that." And it took me some time to go around and kind of find those leaves. And then I picked some other stuff as well. And she made a little arrangement, and she said, "Now you draw this, but you don't have to draw it exactly the way it looks. You just draw what you're noticing." And that was what was really, that anchors her engagement with how she saw things, actually, and also how she brought us to see things. It was different. It was always to see it in your own perspective, see it in your unique way. Don't see because in school we were taught to kind of draw figures that had to look perfect, and at home we are asked to draw things that don't look perfect, that need to look exactly kind of do it. We had the freedom to draw a vase in one square and just put something on it. So yeah, I think it just brings us to say that, Ma was like someone who helped us learn to notice things differently, and she had an emotional engagement with beauty. So she would cry if she saw people's work. Sometimes she would cry when she heard a raga. She would cry. She would cry when she would read a beautiful story in my Hindi textbook, where she's teaching me to go for an exam, and she would see that, and I'm like, "Mom, don't cry. This is just a story in my school book." And she's like, "But imagine the story." And she would be crying like, "Oh my God, I have to go for an exam. Can you please stop crying?" So she had this, this capacity to be so engaged with, it was so, everything was so alive for it. It was like, life was like, the thing was alive, whatever it was, whether she was reading something, whether she was engaged with the colors were, like I said, it was not just the blue. She really entered the blueness of the blue, which means that she was really in that blue, and that blue, she sensed into those colors. And she had a capacity to sense into things, not only from a visual perspective, from an auditory, from a very synesthetic kind of way, everything had, the colors had music, the music had colors, it was just, yeah, that's what I see Ma was about.
Absolutely, and I think Prafulla kind of embodied the age-old tale that King Markandeya asked, you know, please teach me painting, and the gods say, well, for painting you'll have to learn sculpture. And he says, please teach me sculpture, and they say, well, for sculpture you'll have to learn dance. And he says, please teach me dance. And they say, and the gods say, well, for dance you have to learn music. And he says, please teach me music. And the gods say, for that you have to learn poetry. And I think Prafulla was a contemporary embodiment of all of that. She appreciated everything and found the connections between all the arts. Not only that, when she finished a work, she expected her audience to communicate with the work and find something in the work that would speak to them. And that again, you know, it brings me back to Abhinava Gupta's vision of Dhwani, where the work speaks to the audience. So each person brings with them what they can as a rasik and takes from the work what they can. So she never interfered in people's interactions with her work, and yet it was very clear that she wanted people to know certain things about the work. So that green, which embodies Goa, I mean, and Goa was so much a vital part of Prafulla's life and her love in many ways. And that green and yellow is Goa. And anyone who's been to Goa and seen paddy fields just equates that work with Goa, and the work transports the person back to Goa. And she did that time and again. And one of the things that she did so beautifully was to be aware of when she became a grandmother to bring back figuration into her work for that one series, literally kind of claiming for herself the figures of her grandchildren. So that it was a constant quest. She didn't stand still with her work ever.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that she didn't stand still, and also that she had the courage to go back to the figure after many years of abandoning it for herself, and that this is somebody who was a very brave artist, to be an artist, to persevere as an artist, and to continue to grow and evolve when many artists, including some of our most famous artists in our art history in India, you know, didn't embody that same spirit, but, you know, stayed with a certain style or discursive way of, you know, discursive turn for their whole careers once they'd found something that worked. And she didn't do that. She kept evolving. And even, you know, you can draw a line from some of the early abstract landscapes in the first room all the way to these you know, purely abstract works that in color evoke Goa. She was thinking about place and thinking about land throughout her career. You know, I noted in some of the works in the second room that were painted during the emergency that their turbulence may have reflected a difficult moment. She was not apart from her environment. She was not apart from politics or the history of India, though one wouldn't call her work overtly political or about any specific moment in history. But this is somebody who was really of the world around her, and you know, fully engaged with society. And before we turn it over to the audience for a couple of questions, I wanted to come back one last time to really the challenges of habilitating a woman artist in art history. And, you know, as a confession, I myself finished my dissertation on art in Bombay in 2009 about 5 male artists. And so I too have been part of this problem. And it's been such a gift to be part of this process of, you know, rethinking my own biases and how I worked, you know, as a PhD student and subsequently as a curator and art historian. But we have to, you know, we all have to do better and, you know, think more holistically about the artistic environment that Prafulla grew up in and grew in. I wonder if you could talk lastly, Savita, about really the difference between the 1950s and subsequently, and how just the environment that Prafulla was in before there was kind of a commercial component, and how there was a slight change and something for us to be cognizant of as we rewrite these art histories.
Well, from my researches, what I can say is that it was the 50s and the early 60s when there were fewer commercial pulls and stresses. It was a much more immersive space, the art world, but also far more collaborative. So Prafulla spoke once at her show in London about how she'd done a work and how Hussein kind of said, but I don't think this is right. Why did you use a particular color? And apparently Gaitonde said that she shouldn't have used the roller in a particular way. And she said, but you don't know what's in my mind. And I will just do this because that's what I'm going to do. And the memory came unbidden very early this morning. And it was Prafulla, but it also goes to show how artists weren't scared about interfering in each other's work or thinking that they could say things that would help an artist along. And I was having an interesting conversation with a young art historian who was bemoaning the fact that there are no critics now, but there were very active critics at the time. And people like Nyaneshwar Nadkarni, who grew up in that milieu of artists, who hung around all the time, who could speak their language and did speak their language, and whom artists took seriously when he criticized their works, or rather, I would say, critique their works. Or when he said to an artist, you could do better, you should do better, there was a genuine feeling that the artist could do better. It wasn't a commercial put down, but it was a feeling that an artist could and should spread their wings and experiment and do better. And I think this young art historian reminded me that that is sadly not the case anymore, that few critics write, that people are scared of writing about artists, that commercial galleries have a lot more power. There were very few commercial galleries at the time we are speaking about. And the balance seems to have shifted in different directions, which are not all bad, but not all good either. I think the balance has just shifted, and it's up to artists and critics to move the balance back into a center space where there is room for a commercial side of art. Of course, everyone wants to earn a living, but there is also room to listen to people when they tell you, you could do better, you could do different, you should explore. And for a space that allows, a safe space that allows artists to really grow into themselves.
Yeah, I think, globally, in India as elsewhere, there is this ongoing problem of a lack of real art criticism. And that's an unfortunate historical turn, and something that all artists would benefit from, having it not just be about whether your show is review worthy, but actually saying something critical about it to improve it. And it is the case that Prafulla came up at a time when there was real art criticism and real discourse, and you had critics who were not polarized, who came to see the shows sincerely, and who wrote about the work, which is quite incredible. And then it's only later, with commercial concerns that things get codified in a very particular way, where you would think there was one artist who invented abstraction in India, and then there was Nasreen and Zarina, both of whom studied abroad, and whose work fit into a very typical Euro-American modernist narrative, and so that worked quite neatly. But there was I think the point is that there was a very rich context, intellectual context, artistic context, around Prafulla in these early years, and it's worth both remembering that and seeing how to get back to that in some ways. Do you have any closing thought, Gopika, before we take one or two questions?
Well, I think you've encapsulated beautifully.
Sing a song.
No.
It's okay if you don't.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I think you've really encapsulated so much, and we've had a moment of, I'm actually feeling overwhelmed a little bit just thinking about Mom now, because she's really present, I think, with us in this conversation. She's probably like going to criticize me and say, oh my God, Gopika! But then she'll also be very proud of me, because outside of criticizing me, and coming to criticizing, I think, you know, she always wanted to see us grow. Even as kids, we were criticized. I mean, but we thought, hey, you can say that to us, you need to encourage. I mean, she was encouraging us. Of course, her way of doing that and showing love was to say, you could do that better, right? So I think it really comes back to thinking about, when you talk about that, it's like comes back home to me. And now when I think about it, I say, wow, Mom really wanted something out of us, that we would really push the boundaries of what we were kind of trying to express within ourselves, and how we could find that the same feeling of how she pushed all of those boundaries for herself. So she was someone who was boundaryless. In fact, she also talked about how the frames of her paintings, you know, was restricting that eternal space, and she had this specific framing idea that she would want to leave a gap between her painting and the frame. And so we've kind of followed that in reframing this. So yeah, she was someone who was boundless. She had that kind of spirit that, you know, that really brought us to also, now I have a whole different view of Ma, since we've researched, you know, all of this work that's gotten so much attention, of Gauritai also coming with so much engagement with it, and we work together with so much love and ease as a family. Everyone's been involved in this project, and that's been so touching also, that all the family has been involved, the granddaughters have been involved. It's been lovely to see how Ma is being celebrated here, and this is now a moment where we're all sitting and talking about her, and I'm like, I want to cry. It's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a microphone for one or two audience questions? Okay, great. Just, you know.
Okay. Thanks for a wonderful discussion. Savita Apte mentioned of Goa in her paintings, especially abstraction. But I starkly remember, as a very young critic as I was, Prafulla spoke to me also about Sahyadris, and I mean she graphically told me about her bungalow in Lonavala, and I could imagine as a regular traveler to Pune and Mumbai, and those stretches of basalt in Sahyadris. I mean, did your research go further to Sahyadris, and how was the transition, and like how did Prafulla accommodate these two different geographies in the same language, you know?
Thank you for that question, Abhijit. I have to admit that my research has not gone so far as to know how she accommodated the different geographies in her work. But from the writings that we've recovered and are slowly going through, she definitely did immerse herself in different spaces at different times. My referencing to Goa was because throughout her writing, Goa appears in one form or another, and she's constantly referring to either the sunlight in Goa or the green from Goa, all through her writings in all the different decades. But I take note of the Sahyadri, and I will come back to you when I have an answer, definitely.
Hi, my name's Keshav. I had a quick question about her murals. You guys mentioned the murals quite a bit. Could you talk about some of the murals that are still up and around Bombay and where one can go see them, and especially the ones that are publicly accessible? That'd be really interesting.
The ones that are accessible are in residential buildings, sadly. So I don't know how accessible they are to the public now, but the UNESCO,
they all need permission to.
Almost all the buildings now need permission. Life has changed.
Going in one of the buildings. They are not letting me in. I said, my माँ ने किया है वो. ये क्या किया है माँ ने? ये क्या है हमने?
Vazay College is open, and I was going to say the HDFC one in Lonavla is also open. So there are two in two different media that you can go and see.
And most of the others that we saw together last winter are upscale residential buildings in South Bombay, and even though clearly there's a social signifier at the time, many of them are covered in moss or behind an air conditioning thing, or these aren't as highly valued as they should be, and my hope is that in some small way we can affect a change, that these can be properly restored and properly viewed in the future, and that when the ceramics need restoration, that they're not just painted over with random yellows and things like that. So they are not all available right now, but they're not lost. So there's a future possibility for many of them.
There's another one in Pilani, right?
Bits Pilani has one of her big.
And Muscat in Oman.
And Muscat in Oman.
Hello, my name is Saroj Satija. I worked closely with Prafulla during the time I ran Bajaj Art Gallery in the beginning and later Artist Center. And in the beginning, I was quite intrigued of what her abstract painting meant. Like most people, what does a painting mean? So I asked her once, not knowing much about art, she said, it means eternity. That's one thing which I still remember about her aim, eternity. Another thing which I found very significant about her painting was that she painted with rollers, different types of rollers. I thought all painters painted with brushes and, I don't know, with some by hand, even their fingers or whatever, but she painted with rollers. And I remember one exhibition which she had at Bajaj Art Gallery when I was looking after that gallery, and there was one painting she was not happy with because the lowest part of that painting did not show enough, perspective. So she said, what do you think of it? I said, you're right. She took a small roller with a few depth strokes. She did whatever she had to, and it transformed the painting. So these are particular things I remember about Prafulla, apart from other personal things which are generosity and hospitality and whatever.
Thank you. That's a wonderful memory. And of course, the rollers are an important part of this art history as well, which she initially had brought them back from Paris and very famously shared them with Gaitonde. And sometimes the story of her involvement ends there. But we can see very clearly that she was instrumental in developing a language, a visual language with them as part of an Indian art history. So thank you for that memory. We probably have time for one or maybe two more questions.
Hi, I'm Nitya Agrawal, and I wanted to know a bit more about her landscapes. So, as you people mentioned that she wrote mostly about Goa. So, is her landscape about that specific space, or did she go to various spaces and then painted, or all of these are her imagination that she would go here once and capture those scenes live?
Well, in one of the interviews we found recently about Mashi, she talks about of course her early works were landscapes influenced by Goa, and you can see the trees, and you can see, and then it kind of transcends to mindscapes, which is what she wanted you to imagine, kind of an invitation for you to come in and imagine what you wanted to imagine in it. So some people see the sky, and some people see mountains, and some people see the clouds, and she wanted that. She wanted you to enter it in the way that you experienced it. So that was her way of inviting you in. She wanted you to be reached by her art, as you reach into it. So I think that's what I can say, like in response to your question, if that answers it. So it was not only about Goa, but Goa was, of course, a big part of her upbringing, and Lonavala studio, going up in the rains in the car and seeing all these green paddy fields, and how she would stop doing what you're doing and look out of that window and look at that green. That green, you will never get it anywhere. That kind of a relationship with color and landscape. But then when it came down to her paintings, it also transcended just the landscape. It transcended to her philosophical seeking, may I say that? Which was about the Brahmand, or the eternal continuum. The continuum is definitely a word I feel that would describe her and her work, because today we are here 10 years post her passing, and 700 people turn up yesterday, and today there are so many of you. So yeah, and her work is also about that continuum. So I think,
And thank you so much. And I would just add to that, that's such a poetic answer, and mine will be more dry, so I apologize. But landscape is also a way for her to experiment and try different solutions at resolving a picture plane, and to figure out the right balance of abstraction and recognizable forms. And you see that in some of the progression of the landscape works. A number of Indian artists after independence for the next 15, 20 years were using landscape for different reasons. This is also generally very common in art history at times of great political change. But again, not to directly map one-to-one of her work onto other art histories or a certain moment, but I think you can see the way that she's using a universal art historical trope as a way to figure out how she wants the picture plane to look, where there's rows of trees, and then eventually the trees give way to just rows of form, and so it's part of her figuring out how to resolve the canvas. Yeah.
And as children, I remember her telling us to look at her paintings when she made that transition with like half eyes. Like, can you look at it with half eyes? Do you still see those trees? So like she would, you remember that? Everyone remembers it. Yeah.
But also she was a studio artist. So to answer one of your questions, she didn't actually go from place to place and specifically,
not site specific.
Yeah, paint a particular landscape. And in her early development, you can see that the landscape moves from Ragamala paintings studied at JJ onwards and more loose and looser until she comes to her own particular landscape. So there is a definite development and growth that starts from JJ and continues.
Yeah.
I think we can take one more question if there's one burning question. Yeah, and then we'll wrap.
Hello, Gopika.
Sorry, it's not really a burning question.
It's on.
It might be a little bit, it's not a very burning question.
I will not ask any questions, but I will take permission to you to contribute a little bit about Prafulla ji, how I observed last 35, 40 years in Bombay. Being in JJ, I just retired from JJ professor. And when we entered in 86, I came to acquainted some of the common friends, Ravindra and many of people we were studying together. And we are often used to go to Prafulla's house, and you people were very small those days. And I found Prafulla a very magnificent personality. She touches the many artists, many writers, many playwriters, and you can take a names, Bulabai Desai as you told. And from 80s to 90, I observed a lot, and later on the scenario changed in 95 in Bombay. But before that, without Prafulla, nothing was fulfilled. Wherever she goes, the space is fluid, and when the program is complete. Everybody wanted to her to be a part of their celebration, where marriages, exhibitions, any difficulty of any paternity of the art. So I remember a decade before when she died. After that, many people are not supported properly, actually, and things are become very different. Diverse situation has become critical in Bombay. There was some check on Bombay art field. She was the mother of art, actually. You say Amma, right? So personally, many people are benefited, and thank you for her contributions. Yeah.
Thank you. Sure, I think there's somebody already has a microphone, so we'll take
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking my question. So I was very interested in the way that you spoke about the way other women artists like Prafulla as well. There's been a sort of process of not rehabilitate, but trying to sort of understand where they are, what they're doing, where they've come from, and that's kind of been a little bit of a later project. And I'm just wondering, does this also have to do with the fact that Prafulla was such an entrenched institution builder, and does it have to do with the fact that this is also a gender issue? Is it that how did the art market respond to her when she was around and making her works? If you could perhaps just speak a little bit about that. Thank you.
I think the answer to your question is just a resounding yes. But just to restate, many artists who are considered the most important Indian artists today worked in her milieu and were not selling paintings for $1 million in 1970. This is something that happened later. And this is the way that history, gets written with a canon, and then there are corrective measures. So, with regard to the last part of your question, I think the market component may have been a little bit less because most artists didn't have much, a very vibrant market at the time. This was a fledgling art world, and again, artists had to be brave just to commit to the profession of being an artist at a time when there were very few galleries and there weren't collectors, and we're still in a place where there aren't that many institutions. So artists had to have a lot of courage, and of course Prafulla did. But thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Beth, Gopika, and Savita, for bringing Prafulla, the artist, and Prafulla, the human being, alive for us this evening. And thank you to many of you who have shared your memories of her and made it so heartwarming for us. I also want to specially thank you both, Gauri and Gopika, for taking forward your mother's vision through the Prafulla Dahanukar Art Foundation. There's such incredible works of art. I hope some of you have seen the artworks on display at the gallery, which is adjacent to this. I just would like to say that it is, Savita, you spoke about the intersections of art and music and dance and poetry. And I'm wondering, and before I actually go down that path, I just want to say that it's really evocative and lovely to host this conversation with the Jahangir Art Gallery, which I think is so closely enmeshed and has been so closely engaged with Mumbai's art journey and art history. And I want to thank the team at the Jahangir Art Gallery for all their support in making this whole retrospective and this conversation today a possibility. But coming back to the point that you had raised about the intersection of art, music, dance, and poetry, Gopika, I think it'll only be befitting if we close this evening with you singing a very brief tribute to your mother. Yeah.
Well,
Well, Mom really enjoyed my chanting. She would listen to my chanting a lot, and she spoke about that. So I could do a chant. Or I could do Pandharicha, which is her. Well, one of the... What I could do... So before she passed on, she was, singing a song that was composed by my grandmother. That's what she told me. And she taught me this song almost breathless, actually, because I really wanted to know the song. So she couldn't really teach me all the intricacies of the song, but it was a song that is actually a song that when we told Ma to sing at home, she would sing this song, which was to Vitthala, and it was written by Ba, who was her mother, and it's in Marathi. Is that okay if I sing a little part of that? Ya Pandharicha Vitevari Hari Ubha Rahila Hari Ubha Rahila Ya Sakha Ubha Rahila Ya Pandharicha Vitevari Hari Ubha Rahila.